on, slip and slide. You get cool, it's a long wet ride.
And with Marvel Comics, you're never alone because they can go with you.
The game is called Lawn Darts.
Kids in the 70s really knew how to have fun. There was no internet or social media, so they pretty much had to work with what they had. And boy, did they have a lot. In case you missed out on the thrilling adventures of the 70s as a kid, here are 20 summer activities every 70s kid will always remember. Riding bikes everywhere was at the top of the list for most fun activities in the summer, especially as a group. Kids would file out with their bicycles with no helmet, of course, and some of them would show off their stunt skills with their cool Schwinn's and their high handlebars and comfy banana seats. These bikes took up most of the whole day, and the kids would meet in the morning after breakfast, have a miniature competition pedaling as fast as they could to see who had the legs, and you could tell where all of the kids in the neighborhood were by the number of bikes parked at a certain house or place. Flying over ramps was an important activity that kids engaged in to see who was the most Evel Knievel of them all. They would be gone for hours once there was a packed lunch or a snack, and everything was fine as long as they got home before the street light came on. Playing Kick the Can was a game that kids enjoyed doing. It was similar to hide and seek or capture the flag, but with a twist. It was usually played with at least 3 people to as many as dozens, and as the game would suggest, it was played with an empty can that was often stuffed with small stones for a bit more noise. The player who's designated as it would try to find other players who would look for the perfect place to hide. If one was caught, the player was placed in jail, which is just kids' language for a place of non-participation. But they could also be freed if one of the hiding players rushed in and kicked the can without being caught. The prisoner was freed and could go back to hiding, while the person who was it continued to search. It was always stressful being it, because the poor kid could spend all day long searching for those who were hiding, while the ones who were caught would consistently be freed when a player kicked the can. The game would typically end when the person who was it caught every hiding player and placed them in jail. Building tree houses was the ultimate summer project. Kids could spend hours gathering nails, scrap metal, wood, and other tools that would be used to build a tree house. The hideaway was usually built a few meters up a tree and served as a private place or clubhouse for friends to both meet and hang out. Most tree houses had no actual blueprint and didn't require any special carpentry skills. They may not be perfect, but they were sturdy enough to accommodate a few kids as long as weighty adults didn't go climbing in. Parents would often lend their expertise to the building process. Finding the right oak with sturdy branches was important to make sure that the tree was nice and sturdy. And the toughest part was getting that floorboard to stay flat on the branch without slipping off. Decorating the tree house was just as fun, and kids would hand in pictures and create all forms of aesthetics to give the interior a feel of home. When the sun went down, they could spend a magical evening catching fireflies. All you needed was a glass jar and a lack of being afraid of insects. The little lights from the flies would give away their position, and kids would move with stealth and patience, capturing as many as they could. That glass jar had bits of holes to provide the flies with ventilation, and once enough fireflies had been caught, kids could sit on the porch with their jars full of the bioluminescent fireflies and watch them glow as though they were little bits of stars in the sky. Mom would always make sure that they let them go after a short time. When the summer weather got too hot, kids could go swimming at the local pool. There were usually others there as well, so sometimes it could get a little crowded. Even with the supervision of an adult, it was always chaotic with kids pulling pranks on themselves. It was a time to catch up with friends from school. A pruny skin and hair smelling of chlorine wasn't enough to stop the fun. Kids could swim until the last minute and only got out when the lifeguard blew the whistle, signaling the closure of the pool.
Take 8 wheels, put them on millions of pairs of feet, and you have a great national pastime.
Friday and Saturday evenings were spent at the roller rink. It was basically a place where people went for indoor roller skating, consisting of a large space with a hard or concrete floor. Going to the roller rink was an activity that kept children preoccupied and out of trouble. As soon as you walked into the arena, you were greeted with the delicious scent of popcorn, skating music, and the uncoordinated sound of wheels gliding over the polished floor. After getting your skates, the beginners worked on balance on the inside while the pros zipped around with finesse, doing tricks and spins and crossovers. Elbow and knee pads kept people from serious injuries, but whether you got your money's worth through participation or simply stood on the side, watching people have a good time, the roller rink was a delightful social hub for everyone in the neighborhood. Remember those spiky lawn darts that were often used as family entertainment during picnics and barbecues? Playing with lawn darts was an outdoor game that families and friends played on the lawn or backyard during small get-togethers. It was a simple game consisting of a long missile-shaped dart with heavy pointed metal tips. The darts were about a foot long with fins like arrows, and players would toss them underhand to try and land inside of a ring 20 feet away. The closer you were, the higher your score. The whole setup was risky and even more unsafe, with kids loitering around, and it's no wonder that the game was later banned for safety. You'll likely not be able to play this game at a party anymore, but it was a thrill in the past.
Whoa! TIE fighters! Fireballs! Coming right at me! Watch the laser towers!
If you were into video games in the 70s, you remember arcade games like Pong, Asteroids, and Space Invaders. Kids spent a good portion of the day hanging out at the arcade. They'd save up a few quarters for an unforgettable afternoon. The air in the arcade was thick with the smell of popcorn, the hum of electronics, and the buzz of neon signs, and children took turns trying to beat each other's records while people marveled at their skill. If your record remained unbroken for days, you were treated like a rock star. The arcade was a social place for kids and one to escape from adults for a while.
If you're looking for adventure this summer, escape with Marvel Comics.
Comic books were gold in the 70s, at least for children. They were some of the most appreciated art pieces that brought kids together. Reading comic books and swapping them for more was quite common. If you owned a limited edition, you pretty much had superpowers and could make kids do anything you wanted just to read from the book. Kids were usually collectors, and no matter how many comics they owned, they couldn't wait to hit the store and splurge on some new ones. It didn't matter if it were Marvel, DC, Tales from the Crypt, or others. The experience was all the same.
Hey, I'm Harvey, Junior Camp Director here at Camp Augustus.
At the end of school sessions, kids couldn't wait to go to summer camp. There was always a mix of excitement and nervousness, especially for those attending for the first time. Going to summer camp was one of the highlights of the summer, being out there in nature and having fun with other children. Each child would pack up clothing, swimsuits, flashlights, bug spray, a sleeping bag, and more, and it was usually a place in the woods without any technology, and if you were lucky, there was electricity. The rustic cabins had open windows as a source of ventilation, and the camp days would be packed full of activities and games like sports, scavenger hunts, hiking, and more. No activity would be complete without a campfire and marshmallows. It was all about freedom and fun in nature.
Just unroll the Whammo slip and slide, hook up to any water faucet, and the magic surface goes to work.
Do you remember playing with slip and slides? The long, narrow sheet of plastic that laid across the lawn was about 20 feet long, and once it was set up, the garden hose was used to water the plastic until it became a slippery runway. Kids could run toward the plastic to build momentum and then slide on their belly or back, allowing the plastic to move them smoothly to the end. In many cases, they'd exceed the sheet and slide into the grass or even onto a sidewalk before reaching the end of the sheet. The slip and slide was a game of technique, and many would wipe out without getting to the end. It was usually an entire afternoon of family fun with various versions, including double team matches and more. And whether you were a kid or an adult, the slip and slide was an unforgettable memory that lives on in our hearts. Fortunately, it's not completely lost to the 70s, and many people still do it today. Nothing cools the heat on a scorching summer day like running through the sprinklers. Kids in the 70s had a fun-filled day running and playing in the lawn, while active sprinklers would squirt water in every direction. Getting soaked in the chaotic and unpredictable bursts of water, it was impossible not to take a few gulps to quench your thirst. Jumping and skipping over the sprinkles and trying to avoid the water was one of the fun parts, before giving in and allowing yourself to be drenched. If your dog was available, well, even better, because the more the merrier. Eventually, your mother would yell for you to get inside before you caught a cold. Building go-karts was one of the most exciting DIY projects for kids back in the 70s because unlike tree houses, which were a static structure, the go-kart was able to move and would be used as a source of entertainment for as long as possible. The building process could take between hours to weeks, depending on the complexity of the structure, the amount of resources required to build it, and the manpower available to do the actual building. Pieces of wood were used for the carriage, Boris wheels for the movement, and other essential materials. None of the kids were professional builders, which made the result only as good as their imagination. When the go-kart was complete, kids took turns riding down hills and had competitive races while controlling it with a small steering wheel. In some cases, it was pulled along by another child. Either way, it was a satisfying experience with bragging rights for the winner of the race.
As a youth, I was just an average genius. The puppy prodigy, they called me. Got my degree at Harvard when I was 3.
There was no better feeling than waking up bright and early on a Saturday morning for cartoons. And if you were a kid in the 70s, watching Saturday morning cartoons was all you thought about. The Saturday routine presented hours of animated fun, comedy, and action without interruption. Kids could sneak into the living room even before their parents were awake to get a head start on the programs with a bowl of their favorite sugary cereal. The marathon would begin with a mixture of classics like Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, Looney Tunes, and more, and as the morning wore on, the shows would switch to more intense and action-packed cartoons for older kids. As long as they held the remote and the adults were out of sight, it was a pleasant and entertaining Saturday. Thinking back to those days brings nostalgic memories of when TV shows were partitioned to cater to different demographics. On some hot afternoons, kids would explore creeks and ponds in search of adventure, and marshy areas were not exempted. They'd role-play as adventurers discovering new lands, and while this activity was in progress, one of the things they loved to do was catching frogs and turtles. These elusive critters were caught with buckets, nets, and sometimes barehanded. The croak of the frog and the splash of the turtle usually gave them away, as kids would chase excitingly, leaping into the water and stumbling on rocks. After hours of playing with these animals, the kids would return to the water where they belong. These activities taught children to connect with nature and develop a love for wildlife. There was nothing as relaxing as spending an evening at the outdoor theater, popularly known as the drive-in. Attending drive-in movies allowed families to bond over good old entertainment displayed on a large projector in the park. At sunset, the park would fill up with cars. Besides couples, parents would bring their kids to a family-friendly movie night. There would be popcorn, sandwiches, soda, and others, and this communal entertainment was unforgettable for children as it renewed their family bonds. Playing stickball in the street was an old pastime activity that was played during the warm days of summer. A game born out of creativity and simplicity, parents and children would transform the street into a makeshift game park for the sake of space, and the equipment included a bat, which was often a broom or a piece of wood, and a rubber ball. The minimalist sport didn't require any fancy tools or expensive gear. The rules of the game weren't significantly different from baseball, except for a few quirks. Stickball wasn't necessarily about the skill, it was mostly about the fun and community as rules were pretty loose. Players had to watch out for cars, avoid breaking glass, and every once in a while a player would catch a ball to the back or another odd place. Teams could argue over fouls and rules, but that made the game all the more interesting. As a kid in the 1970s, listening to 8-track tapes was one unavoidable experience. The 8-track was a rectangular cartridge, bigger than a cassette tape, and was used to save music. Since musicians released on 8-track tapes, it was important to own an 8-track player, and parents ensured that they had one in the home and the car. Dad would brandish an 8-track tape as a solution to boredom during a long road trip or at home during rainy weather. And it didn't matter the occasion, the tapes were present to lift the mood. As other forms of technology for storing music began to emerge, the 8-track tape took backstage for the revolution. 8-track tapes do still exist, but only as a piece of the past, a nostalgic element to remind us how long it's been and how far we've come. Arts and crafts was another activity that allowed children to express themselves using colors and artistic elements. With this in mind, kids developed a keen interest in making colorful quality bracelets. They often called them friendship bracelets, symbolizing their love and dedication to anyone they cared about. Making a friendship bracelet was a special activity and a time to be creative. No two bracelets were ever the same, as it would defeat the entire idea of creating something unique and special that only one person could have. After creating these special bracelets, kids would give them to friends with whom they had a connection or would like to build a different level of friendship. Maybe you remember getting a friendship bracelet in the past. Your backyard was one of the most interesting places to have an adventure. Aside from building a tree house or organizing games like lawn darts, another thing people loved to do was camping in the backyard. There were too many reasons why this was a good idea. Firstly, it was close to the house, so you could have the outdoors and nature and the experience with the option of quitting and going back indoors when things got out of hand. Secondly, it was familiar territory, free space to do whatever you wanted, and legal property. Parents didn't need to worry about packing because you could easily get everything you needed inside. The bonding experience was exceptional, roasting marshmallows over a campfire, singing songs and telling stories, and feasting on crackers and s'mores. Learning to make a tent, it was a night of fun for the entire family. By the end, everyone was snuggled up in a sleeping bag and watching the stars while enjoying the air. Backyard camping was both safe and memorable. Which of these summer activities do you remember? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video and would like more, be sure to like the video, subscribe, and turn on your notifications. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.